Hello everyone. So in this tutorial we'll be discussing about decorators in Python. So decorator is actually a bit of an advanced concept and it is actually a little bit more difficult to understand, but I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. So before we discuss about decorators, we need to actually understand uh, some concepts like first class functions and closures. So let us discuss a little bit about both these concepts before getting into decorators. So first class functions allow us to treat functions like any other objects. So we have some functions here, so they allow us to actually treat us like other objects. So we can actually pass a function to a variable, or we can actually give it as a argument inside a function. So we can actually give a function as an argument inside another function. So these are called first class functions. So basically they allow us to treat functions as any other normal object. And closures allow us to take advantage of the first class function and actually return an inner functions. So I have a few line of code here. So I have defined an outer function, and inside that we have a message variable, and it is set to high here, and we have a inner function here, and basically what it does is it will actually print out this message. So this inner function has actually got access to this message variable which is in the outer function. So and what it basically does, it actually prints it. So when we actually execute we actually execute the inner function here at the end, so we actually return the inner function here. So now if I just print, or if I just execute the outer function, and if I just run the program, what happens is it prints high, or in other words the inner function gets executed. So that is what is happening here. So now let's actually return the value of this inner function without actually executing it. So to do that, just have to remove this parenthesis here, and now the value will be returned and it will not be executed. So if I just run the program, you can see that nothing has been printed because we haven't executed it. It only just returns the value. So now we can actually pass this to a variable. So I say my function, or whatever you want to call it, my function. And now to actually execute this, we can say my function of. And now if I run this program, you can see that high has been executed. So this is what a closure is. A closure actually remembers our variable, or the value of our variable, even after executing the outer function. Okay, now let's execute this multiple times. So we'll say my function, let's execute this 3 times maybe, and then uh, let's execute this 3 times, and if I run this, you can see that it has been executed thrice. So this is what a closure is. A closure remembers our variable, or actually it remembers our value inside the variable even after executing this outer function. So this is what a closure is. So now we can actually just go here and just remove this message variable, and instead of setting our variable inside this, we can actually directly pass. Okay, we can just remove this high message, and we can actually say msg here, and we can actually pass this here. So yeah, and now if we can actually create two functions. So now we have actually removed this high from here, and we can actually now pass this. So let's just remove all this, and we'll create two variables here called high function and by function, and inside this we'll say high, and this will be by. So now if we just execute this high function and by function, and if we run this, you can see that high and buy has been executed. So this is just what closure is. So I think you actually got a basic idea on what closure actually is. So yeah, the definition for closure is simply they are just inner function that can actually access the variable in from the main function, and then can actually print out things or do things according to that. So yeah, they are just inner functions. So I now think that you actually got a basic idea on what closure is. So let's discuss what a decorator is. So a decorator in Python is a function that takes another function as its argument, adds some extra functionality to that function, and then returns yet another function. Decorators can be extremely useful, and they allow you to extend the function without actually modifying the source code of the original function. So the source code will remain the same, but you can actually modify the functionality of that function. So let me just copy paste some code. And so if you see, I have a new function here, and it is exactly similar to the older function that we actually used to discuss closures. So if you let's look at here, both of them are same except the names have actually changed. So we don't need this, we have to remove this, we don't need this as well. So instead of actually taking a variable as a parameter, our function or our decorator actually takes another function as its parameter. So in our closure, it was actually taking a variable as a parameter, but here it will actually take another function as its parameter or as an argument. So now instead of this message here, let's pass a function inside this. So I'll just remove this message and I'll say original function or whatever you want to call it, and instead of printing the message, let's just execute that original function inside this. And so now let me just paste some code here. So I have some code here. It's basically a display function. What it does is it just prints out display worked message here. So yeah, this is a simple display function that prints something. So here it prints display works or display worked. So now we have declared a decorator display variable here, and we say decorator function and pass in the display function inside it, because this thing takes a function as a argument or as a parameter here. So we'll pass the display function here, and let's just return, okay, let's return the original function here. So after it runs, it actually returns the value. So okay, so let me tell you what it is happening here. So we are actually setting, we have two functions here first of all, and this display function simply prints display worked. So its job is to just print this statement. So now we say decorator display, this is just a variable, and we are executing our first function. So if you just look at this function here, we can see that it actually takes an argument, it actually takes a function as an argument. So here we are passing the display function as an argument for this function, and then it actually when we actually execute this decorator display function, it actually executes the wrapper function which is inside this decorator function, and if the wrapper function get executed, it executes the original function and returns the value for the original function, which in this case is the display function. So basically the display function is getting executed here. So this function takes another function as its parameter. So this is a decorator. So if we just run this program, you can see that display worked has been printed. So if I just rerun this, we can see that display worked has been printed. So if we just run this program, we can see that display worked has been printed. So that is how it actually works. So basically we are actually executing this function with another function as its argument. So when it actually goes here, it actually executes this inner function, and then it actually goes here, and so when we have to execute this wrapper function and return its value, so the wrapper function just executes the original function or the function that we gave as a parameter here, which is the display function, and it gets executed and the value get returned. So that is what is happening here. This is actually a very simple or very simplified form of a decorator, the most simple form of a decorator if you want to call it that way. Now that we have a basic idea on how this wrapper function works, let's see what or why we use this, or why do we use such a difficult thing. So wrapper functions, it lets us add functionality to our existing functions without actually modifying our original function. For example, in this case, the display function, without modifying this display function, we can actually add functionalities to this, or we can actually execute or do things before or after executing this function. So for example, say I want to print something before executing this display function, I can actually say, for example, I'll come here and I'll just say print, and we are going to use the format strings, and I'll say wrapper function executed this before, and we will put a curly braces here, and then we'll just get the function name using the original function dot name method. So this is just to get the name of the function. So in this case, it will actually have to display here. So now if I just run this program, let's see what happens. So we can see that wrapper function executed this before the display function. So now we actually didn't modify any source code for this function, but we still executed this. We actually modified this, and we were able to do many things without actually modifying the original source code of this function. So that is why we actually use decorators. Okay, so now we actually have discussed some basics of so now we have actually discussed some basic things for decorators, but this is not the actual syntax for decorators in Python. So I just did this to explain things to you. So now to actually this is actually the real syntax. So we say at decorator function, so we are actually adding this functionality to our display function by saying at decorator function. So this is the same thing as this now, but since we have added it, we just need to execute it by simply saying display, and now if we just run this, you can see. So this is actually equal to saying that we want our display function to be wrapped in, or we want our original function, in this case it's display function, but we want our original function to be wrapped in this decorated function. So yeah, it's basically the same thing. So if I just say, so after adding this thing, or after adding this decorator, we just simply need to say display and execute this function. This functionality has been added here now, so we don't have to use that old syntax. This is the real syntax for decorator. So now if I just simply execute this, we get the same result as before. So this is the real syntax for decorators. So now we are actually going to use this syntax from now on, as this is actually much easier. We are basically saying that we need to add the functionality of this to this as well. So it is also equal to saying that display is equal to decorator function of display. So both these commands here do the same thing. So we don't need this anymore. So we are just removing this. We'll simply use this display itself. So we are just adding this here. So now we have a small problem here. So this wouldn't actually work if we actually pass in some arguments. So for example, I'm actually declaring a function. I have pasted 2 lines of code here. So this is actually another function called display info. So this takes 2 parameters, name and age, and it actually prints it. out. So that's what it does. So let's comment this thing out, and now if I say display info, and I'll give the name as Jack and his age as 30, and if I run the program, it works. So yeah, the infos of Jack are Jack and 30, so it prints it like this. So now if I just add this decorator by saying at decorator function, if I just simply add this, and if I try this again, we get an error here. It's an expected error. We get it takes no positional argument, but two were given, because if you look here, it takes a function as an argument, and we already gave that, but it doesn't take any arguments here. So now to solve this, uh, so if you just check the error message here, it actually says type error, wrap function takes 0 positional arguments but 2 were given. So wrap function is not able to accept any arguments. So in order to solve this, we actually need to do something. So we have to say here star args and star star quarks. So basically in Python, these two. So now by adding this args and quarks argument, now you can actually add any number of arguments inside this function. So now this prevents errors. So you also have to add this method or add this args and quarks inside this original function as well. And you only need 1 star here for args and 2 star for quarks. So now if we just print out, or if we just execute both this display and display info function, and if we run the program, we can see that both of them got executed and we have no more errors here. So